61. I want to tell you about the sound a phone makes when it has been buzzing all night in another room. It's not loud. That's the strange thing. By morning, it's almost gentle, a soft, patient rattle against a wooden nightstand, like something knocking that has been knocking for so long it has given up expecting an answer. I woke up on a Sunday morning, 6 years into the most peaceful silence of my life, and I found my phone face down on the nightstand where I'd left it the night before. I hadn't heard it. I'd taken something to help me sleep because I'd had a hard week, and I'd slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a person who has finally, after years, learned how to rest. And I picked up that phone and I turned it over and the screen lit up. And I just stared at it. 61 missed calls. 61. I actually laughed, at first. A small, confused, disbelieving laugh. Because 61 is not a number that means anything normal. 1 missed call is a question. 3 is are you okay? 10 is an emergency. 61 is something else entirely. 61 is a person, or people, throwing themselves against a locked door, over and over, all night long. And I knew, before I even scrolled, before I saw a single name, I knew exactly who it was. Because there was only one set of people on this earth who I had blocked out of my life so completely that 61 calls in one night was the only way they had left to reach me. My family. The family I had cut off, completely and deliberately, 6 years earlier. No calls, no visits, no holidays, no explanations after the first one. 6 years of the cleanest, hardest, most necessary silence of my entire life. And now, in a single night, that silence had been hit 61 times. I scrolled. My hands were steadier than I expected. My mother, 19 calls. My father, 14. My sister, 12. Numbers I didn't recognize. The rest. Landlines. A number that turned out to be a hospital. A number that turned out to be an aunt I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager. 61 calls, from every direction, all funneling toward one phone. Mine. The phone belonging to the person they'd spent 6 years being furious at for daring to walk away. And then I saw it. At the very bottom of the missed calls, there was a voicemail. Just one. They'd left just one. The others had called and hung up, all night. But somebody, at some point, had stopped and taken a breath and left a message. And I sat on the edge of my bed, in the gray morning light, with 6 years of hard-won peace sitting in my chest like a held breath. And I pressed play. And I want to tell you honestly, I have replayed a lot of moments in my life. The day I left, the years before it, the reasons. But of all of them, the 31 seconds of that voicemail are the ones I will hear until the day I die. Because that voicemail broke me. Not the way they'd broken me before. Not that way. Something else. Something I did not see coming, and could not have prepared for, and did not know what to do with. For 6 years I had built a wall, brick by careful brick, and that wall had kept me safe, and let me heal, and given me back my life. I thought the wall was the end of the story. I thought I would never hear from these people again, and I had made my peace with that. More than peace, I had built a whole beautiful life on the far side of that silence. And in 31 seconds, a shaking voice reached over that wall and touched something I thought I had safely locked away forever. Stay with me, because to understand what was in that message and why 61 calls in one night pulled a woman back toward a family she had every right to stay away from, you first have to understand why I left, what they did, and what it cost me to build a silence they finally, desperately needed to break. It starts with the day I finally stopped hoping. 6 years of the best silence of my life. People always assume that when someone cuts off their whole family, there must have been one enormous, dramatic event. A single, unforgivable thing. A moment. And sometimes there is. But usually, and this was my case, it isn't one big thing. It's 10,000 small things. It's a lifetime of small things. Each one tiny enough on its own to be dismissed, to be laughed off, to be called just how she is, but which add up, over decades, into something that quietly crushes you. Let me try to explain what my family was like, and I'll try to be fair, because I've had 6 years and a lot of therapy to be fair. My family ran on a system, and the system had one rule. Some people's feelings matter, and some people's don't, and you don't get to choose which one you are. I was one of the ones whose feelings didn't. I was the middle child, the practical one, the one who was so mature for her age, which, as I've learned, is usually just a polite way of saying the one we stopped taking care of early because she was convenient. My older brother was the accomplished one, the pride, the one whose life was treated like breaking news. My younger sister was the baby, the delicate one, the one whose every mood reorganized the entire household. And me, I was the shock absorber, the one who kept the peace, the one who was told, in 100 ways, that my job in the family was to make things easier for everyone else and to never, ever make things harder. I want to give you the shape of it because the shape is the thing. When I was happy, no one noticed. When I was sad, I was being dramatic. When I succeeded, it was expected. When I struggled, it was an inconvenience. When I had needs, I was difficult. When I had opinions, I was starting things. My mother had a particular gift. She could make you apologize to her for something she did to you. I have watched her do it 1,000 times, and I still don't fully understand the mechanism. You'd come to her hurt by something she'd said, and 40 minutes later you'd be comforting her, apologizing to her, reassuring her that she was a good mother, and your original hurt would have simply vanished, unaddressed, absorbed into the black hole of her needs. Let me give you one example so you can feel it, because the small ones are the ones that really tell the story. When I was 26, I got some genuinely good news, the best professional news of my life at that point. I'd worked for it for years. And I was so excited that I drove over to my parents' house to tell them in person, because some childish part of me still wanted them to be proud. I told them, and there was a pause, and then my mother's face crumpled, and she said, "Well, I suppose you'll be too busy for us now." That's just wonderful. Everyone leaves eventually. And within 10 minutes, I am not exaggerating, I was sitting on her sofa, holding her hand, reassuring her that I would never abandon her, apologizing for making her feel insecure, my good news completely forgotten. I drove home that night feeling guilty for succeeding. That's the machine. That's how it worked. There was no room in it for my joy because all the room was taken up by her need. Every good thing I ever brought home got turned, somehow, into a reassurance I owed her. Every single conversation was about them. Every holiday was a performance of a closeness that didn't exist. Every family event was a minefield where I was expected to manage everyone's emotions except my own. And the thing that finally did it, the thing that ended it, wasn't cruelty exactly. It was a moment of clarity. I was 30 years old, I was sitting at a family dinner, and something happened. It doesn't even matter what. It was small. It was a comment, a dismissal, a laugh at my expense that everyone joined in on. And I remember sitting there, feeling the old familiar sting, arranging my face so nobody would see it, getting ready to swallow it like I'd swallowed 10,000 of them before. And a voice in my head, very quiet and very clear, said, "You are going to do this for the rest of your life. And then they're going to die, and you're going to stand at their funerals having never once been seen by them. And you will have spent your entire life managing the feelings of people who never spent one single day managing yours." And I put down my fork. And I understood, with total clarity, that I had two choices. I could spend the rest of my life waiting for them to change, waiting for the apology, the recognition, the love that was never, ever going to come. Or I could leave. I chose to leave. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. That was never my way. I simply, over the following weeks, stepped back. I sent one message, a calm, honest one, explaining that I needed space, that the relationship wasn't healthy for me, that I wished them well, but couldn't keep doing this. And then I went quiet. The reaction to that message told me everything I needed to know about whether I'd made the right choice. Because a healthy family, receiving a message like that, responds with concern. What's wrong? What did we do? How can we fix this? Are you okay? My family responded with rage. How dare I? After everything they'd done, how selfish, how cruel, how ungrateful. My mother sent messages for weeks, first furious, then guilt-tripping, then furious again. My father called me a disgrace. My sister told me I was abandoning the family and breaking Mom's heart. Not one of them, not one, ever asked what had actually hurt me. And that was the confirmation. That was the proof. They didn't want to understand me. They wanted me back in my seat, absorbing the shocks, keeping the peace, so the machine could keep running. So I blocked them, all of them. And I built a silence. And I want to tell you something that people who haven't done this will find hard to believe. Those 6 years were the best years of my life. who I became when no one was taking from me. I need you to understand what the silence gave me, because it matters enormously for what comes later. When you spend your whole life as a shock absorber, as the person whose job is to hold everyone else's feelings, you don't actually know who you are. You've never had the room to find out. Every ounce of your energy goes into managing other people, reading the room, keeping the peace, staying small. And when you finally step out of that role, something extraordinary happens. You get yourself back. In the first year of the silence, I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. It was almost physical, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of stones for 30 years and had finally been allowed to set it down. I hadn't even known how heavy it was until it was gone. I started sleeping properly, really sleeping, for the first time since childhood. The low-grade dread I'd carried my whole life, the constant background hum of what will they need from me, what mood is mom in, what am I about to be blamed for. It just stopped. I made real friends. This surprised me. It turned out I'd never had the energy for real friendship before, because all my emotional energy was being drained by my family. Now, with that energy freed up, I could actually be present for people. I built friendships that were mutual, where feelings went both directions, where I was allowed to have needs, where someone asked, "How are you?" and actually waited for the answer. I met someone, a good, kind, steady person named David, who I later married. And I could not have married him, could not have even recognized what a healthy love looked like if I'd still been tangled up in my family, because they'd taught me that love was something you earned by disappearing. David taught me that love was something you received by simply existing. I got a promotion at work because for the first time I had the mental space to actually focus. I went to therapy, and in therapy, I slowly, painfully put words to things I'd never had words for. I learned the difference between a family and an audience. I learned that keeping the peace is not the same as peace. It's just a war where only one side is allowed to fire. I learned that guilt is not the same as wrongdoing. I learned to tell the difference between a boundary and a punishment. And most of all, I learned that I was not the person they'd told me I was. I was not selfish. I was not difficult. I was not cold. I was a person who had been starved of care for 30 years and had finally, sensibly, walked away from the famine. I want to give you one specific moment from those years, because it's the moment I knew the silence was working. It was about 3 years in. David and I had just moved into a little house together, and one evening I was cooking dinner, and he came in from work and he asked me how my day was. Just that, an ordinary question. And I started to tell him. And halfway through, I noticed something. I noticed that I was just talking, freely, without scanning his face for signs of irritation, without editing myself down to the version that wouldn't be too much, without the low hum of dread I'd felt my whole life around the people who were supposed to love me. And he was just listening, actually listening. And when I finished, he asked a follow-up question because he wanted to know more. And I had to put down the spoon and turn away for a second because I was suddenly unexpectedly crying, not from sadness, from the sheer overwhelming relief of it. Because I was 33 years old and that ordinary dinnertime conversation, someone asking about my day and actually wanting the answer, was something I had never once had in my entire childhood. That's what the silence gave me. It gave me a life where being fully myself was not dangerous. Now, I want to be honest, because this story is about honesty. It was not all clean. There were hard nights. There were moments I missed them. Not the real them, but the fantasy of them. The family I wished I'd had. There were holidays that felt hollow. There was guilt. Always the guilt. Whispering that a good daughter doesn't do what I did. But every single time the guilt got loud, I would remember the sound of my own voice at that dinner table, saying, "You are going to do this for the rest of your life." And the guilt would quiet down. Because I knew, with everything in me, that I had saved my own life. Not dramatically, just quietly, by leaving. 6 years passed like that. 6 good years, the best of my life. And then, on an ordinary Saturday night, while I slept the deep sleep of a woman who had finally learned to rest, my phone began to ring, and ring, and ring. 61 times. Every number pointing at me. Let me take you back into that morning. The gray light. The phone face down on the nightstand. The number that made no sense. 61. I told you I laughed at first, and then I scrolled, and the laughing stopped, because as I read the names, a cold understanding started to build in my chest. This was not one person having a breakdown. This was not my mother, drunk and furious, calling to guilt trip me at 2 a.m., which had happened a few times in the early days before I blocked her. This was coordinated. This was everyone. My mother, my father, my sister, aunts, a hospital, numbers I didn't know, all night, all pointing at me. And there's only one thing that makes an entire family, plus outside institutions, throw themselves at a single estranged person all night long. Something had happened. Something real. Something big enough to override 6 years of a war they'd started. And I sat on the edge of my bed, and I felt the old machinery start to wake up inside me. The shock absorber, the fixer, the one whose job was to hold everyone. 6 years of therapy, and still, in an instant, my body remembered its role. My heart started to pound. My mind started to race. What's wrong? Who's hurt? What do they need? What do I have to fix? And I had to physically stop myself. I had to put the phone down and breathe and remember who I was now. Not who they'd made me, who I'd become. I want to describe that feeling because I think anyone who's gone no contact will recognize it, and anyone who hasn't should understand it. It's like your body has two operating systems. There's the one you built, the healthy one, the one that knows your worth, the one that took 6 years and a lot of hard work. And then, underneath it, there's the old one, the original one, the one they installed in you before you could talk. And you think the old one is gone because you haven't run it in years. And then something like this happens, and in half a second, without your permission, the old system boots right back up. My heart was pounding the exact way it used to pound when I heard my mother's car in the driveway as a child. My mind was racing through the old questions. What mood is she in? What do I need to fix? How do I make this okay for everyone? 6 years of freedom, and my body still remembered its cage like it had never left. That's the thing they don't tell you about healing. It doesn't delete the old wiring, it just builds something stronger on top of it. And in a crisis, the old wiring will always try to grab the controls first. The victory isn't never feeling it. The victory is feeling it and choosing the new system anyway. And so I breathed. And I let the old panic rise and crest and start to fall. And then, from the new system, calm and clear, came the understanding. Because here is the thing I understood, even in that first frightened moment, 61 calls did not undo 6 years. Whatever had happened, and clearly something had happened, the fact that they were reaching for me now did not erase the fact that they had spent 6 years refusing to reach for me in any way that mattered. They hadn't called to apologize. They hadn't called on my birthday. They hadn't called to say, we finally understand, we were wrong, we miss you. In 6 years of me being one unblock away, they had chosen fury and silence. And now, suddenly, 61 calls. Which meant this wasn't about me. This had never been about me. This was about them needing something. I knew that. I knew it in my bones, sitting on that bed. And I want you to remember that I knew it, because it makes what happened next so much more complicated. Because I picked up the phone, and I saw the single voicemail. And every instinct I had spent 6 years building told me, don't. Whatever this is, it's a door back into the machine. Don't open it. You know what's on the other side. You always know. But there was that number, the hospital number, and there was that one voicemail, sitting there, waiting. And I am a human being, and no amount of therapy, no amount of healthy distance, no amount of hard-won peace can fully kill the part of you that needs to know. So I pressed play, and I lifted the phone to my ear. And I heard a voice I had not heard in 6 years. 31 seconds. I'm going to tell you about the voicemail now, and I need you to understand that I have thought very hard about how to describe it, because it is the center of everything. Before I pressed play, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment, because part of me knew, the wise part, the healed part, that whatever was on that message was going to change something. You don't get a voicemail after 6 years of silence that leaves you unchanged. I could feel it, the way you can feel weather coming. And I almost didn't listen. I want you to know that. My thumb hovered over it, and every survival instinct I'd built said delete it. Whatever it is, it's a hook. And hooks are how they pull you back. 6 years of hard-won wisdom, screaming at me to protect myself. But there was that hospital number in the missed calls, and there was the simple human truth that I could not walk through the rest of my life not knowing what had happened. So I pressed play, and I lifted the phone to my ear. It was my father's voice. Now, my father, in my whole life, was not a man who showed emotion. He was hard, cold, mostly. He was the kind of father who communicated through disappointment and silence. In 30 years, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd seen him cry or heard his voice shake. And the voice on that message was shaking. He said my name first, just my name. And there was something in the way he said it, something I had never heard from him, not once, in my entire life. He said it the way you say the name of someone you love and are afraid you've lost. And then he said, and I'm going to give you the shape of it, because I can't bear to give you all of it word for word. He said that my mother was in the hospital, that it had happened fast, that it was very serious, and that the doctors were not making promises. And then his voice broke completely, and he said the thing I did not see coming, the thing that broke me. He said, she's been asking for you, all night. It's the only thing she said that's made any sense. Your name, over and over. And I know we have no right. I know what we did. I know why you left. You were right to leave. You were right. And we were too proud and too stupid to ever tell you that. And then, quieter. I'm not calling to guilt you. I swear I'm not. If you don't come, I'll understand. And I won't blame you. And I'll never call you again. But she's asking for you. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least let you know. So you'd have the choice. You should always have had the choice. And then, right at the very end, almost a whisper, the last thing. I'm sorry. For all of it. Whatever happens, I'm sorry. You were the best of us. And we treated you like the least. That was our failure. Not yours. It was never yours. And the message ended. 31 seconds. And I sat on the edge of my bed, holding a phone against my ear that no longer had anything playing on it, listening to silence, with tears running down my face that I hadn't even felt start. Because in 6 years, no, in 30 years, I had waited for those words. You were right. It was our failure, not yours. You were the best of us. Every single thing I had needed to hear my entire life, and never heard, was in that 31-second message. And it had taken my mother being on what might be her deathbed for anyone to say it. That's what broke me, not the emergency, not the fear, the timing. The fact that the love I'd needed my whole life only arrived when disaster forced it out of them. The fact that it took a catastrophe to make my family finally see me. And I sat there, broken open, with the hardest question of my entire life sitting in my lap. Do I go? The two voices. I want to walk you through the next hour because I think it's the most honest part of this whole story, and because I think a lot of you have faced some version of it, or will. There were two voices in me, and they were at war. The first voice, I'll call it the wound, said, go. Of course you go. That's your mother. She's dying, and she's asking for you, and your father just said everything you ever needed to hear. Go. Run. Don't waste another second. You can be there in an hour. And the second voice, the one I'd spent 6 years building in therapy, the one that had saved my life, said, wait, think. You know these people. You know this pattern. A deathbed apology is still an apology that only came because they needed something. 19 calls from your mother, but she's the one in the hospital, so who was really calling? The apology came wrapped in an emergency. That's not an accident. That's the only condition under which this family has ever been capable of seeing you. Do not walk back into the machine just because the machine is finally saying the words. The words are real, but the machine is still the machine. Both voices were right. That's the terrible thing. That's what nobody tells you about these moments. It wasn't a battle between the right choice and the wrong choice. It was a battle between two things that were both true. It was true that they had hurt me for 30 years. And it was also true that my mother was dying and asking for me. It was true that this apology only came because of catastrophe. And it was also true that it was, as far as I could tell, a real apology, the realest thing my father had ever said. It was true that walking back in might undo 6 years of healing. And it was also true that if she died and I didn't go, I would have to carry that for the rest of my life. I sat with those two truths for an hour, and then I did something that I think was the wisest thing I have ever done, and I want to share it with you, because it might help someone. I stopped asking, what do they deserve? Because that question had no clean answer. Did they deserve my presence? No. Did my dying mother deserve to have her daughter refuse her last request? Also complicated. And I realized what they deserve is the wrong question. It keeps you tangled up in them. It keeps the whole thing about them. So I asked a different question. I asked, who do I want to be? Not for them, for me. When I look back on this day in 20 years, what will let me sleep at night? And the moment I asked that question, the answer was clear. I did not want to go back to being their shock absorber. I did not want to be sucked back into the machine, to spend the next month managing everyone's feelings, to let them undo my 6 years of peace. But I also did not want to be a person who let her mother die alone and asking for her, out of a principle, no matter how justified that principle was. I could hold my boundary and show up for this one thing. Those were not mutually exclusive. I had learned that at least. I had learned there was a third door. I could go, as myself, the new self, the healed self, not the shock absorber. I could go and be present for a dying woman, and then I could leave, and I did not have to let it pull me back into anything. I could give this, freely, on my terms, as a whole person, without giving myself away. So I got dressed, and I called David, and he said, "I'll drive you." And I picked up my keys. And the drive to that hospital was 40 minutes long, and it was one of the longest 40 minutes of my life. David didn't fill the silence with talk. He just drove, and put his hand on mine at the red lights, and let me sit with it. And I stared out the window at the ordinary Sunday world going by. People walking dogs, a couple carrying coffee, a kid on a bike, and I thought about how strange it was that the world just keeps going, completely unaware, while your entire life quietly cracks open in the passenger seat of a car. And somewhere on that drive, I made myself a set of promises, small ones, rules for how I was going to do this without losing myself. I promised myself I would stay as long as I chose to, and not 1 minute longer. I promised myself that if the machine started up again, if the guilt tripping started, if the manipulation started, if anyone tried to use this to pull me back into my old role, I would recognize it, and I would leave, and I would not feel bad about it. I promised myself I would go in as the woman I'd become, not the girl I'd been. And I promised myself one more thing. I promised that whatever happened in that room, I would not spend the rest of my life wishing I'd gone. Whatever else this cost me, it would not cost me that. And with those promises held tight in my chest like a handful of stones, I walked through the hospital doors, not knowing what I would find, not knowing that the hardest part of the whole day was still ahead of me. Walking into that hospital was one of the strangest experiences of my life, because I was walking, physically, back into my past, down a corridor toward a family I had deliberately not seen in 6 years. And with every step, I could feel the old self trying to climb back into my skin, the shock absorber, the peacekeeper, the girl who read every room and managed every feeling. And I kept having to remind myself, with every step, you are not her anymore. You are a grown woman who built a whole life. You are here by choice. You can leave anytime. You are safe. I saw my father first. He was sitting in a waiting area, and he looked old. 6 years had done to him what 6 years does. He was smaller, grayer. His coat was buttoned wrong, one button off all the way down, and somehow that was the detail that got me. This man who had always been so controlled, so proper, so careful of appearances, sitting in a hospital waiting room with his coat buttoned wrong because he'd been too frightened to notice. That crooked line of buttons told me more about the state of him than any words could have. And when he saw me, he stood up so fast he almost fell, and he just stood there, staring at me, like he wasn't sure I was real. And then this hard, cold man, this man I had seen cry maybe 3 times in my life, put his hands over his face and started to sob. And I did something I did not plan. I crossed the room and I put my arms around my father, and I let him cry into my shoulder, this old man who had failed me my whole life, and I held him. Not because he'd earned it, because I wanted to be a person who could. And through his tears, he kept saying, you came, thank you for coming. My sister was there too. And it was more complicated with her, because there was so much unresolved, so much she'd said when I left. She hung back. She couldn't quite look at me, but she whispered, thank you, and I nodded, and that was enough for now. There would be time, or there wouldn't. That wasn't the priority. The priority was in the room down the hall. They walked me to it. And outside the door, my father stopped, and he took my hand and he said, she drifts in and out, she might not know you're there. But the nurse said hearing matters, so just talk to her, please. And I steadied myself, and I walked into the room. And I saw my mother, and I want to tell you, all the anger, all the history, all the 6 years, for one moment, all of it just fell away. Because a dying parent is a dying parent, and the body knows it before the mind can argue. She was so small in that bed. This woman who had loomed so large over my entire life, who had controlled every room she was ever in, who had been the sun that my whole family's anxious orbit revolved around. She was tiny now, fragile, machines around her. Her hand on the blanket looked like paper. I sat down beside her, and I took that paper-light hand in mine. And her eyes fluttered, and she turned her head, and she looked at me. And she knew me. I could see it. She knew me. And she tried to speak. And what she said, the first thing my mother said to me in 6 years, is the second thing about this story that I will carry to my grave. Not what I expected. I braced myself. In the second before she spoke, some part of me braced for the old thing, the guilt, the manipulation, the making it about her. Even now, even here, because that was the only version of my mother I had ever known. But that woman was gone. What was left, in that bed, was something stripped down to the very bottom. And what she said was not what I expected. It was not, "Where have you been?" It was not, "How could you leave me?" It was not any of the weapons she'd used my whole life. She looked at me, and her eyes filled, and she said, in a whisper I had to lean in to hear, "I'm so sorry I didn't see you. I'm so sorry I didn't see you." And then, with great effort, a few more words. She said, "You were always the best one." And I was too broken to show you. I spent so long looking at everyone else, and you were right there, the whole time. And I never once just looked at you. And she squeezed my hand, with what little strength she had. And she said, "You were right to go. I'm glad you went. I'm glad you got away from all of it, from me." And that undid me completely. Because do you understand what she was doing? Even at the very end, maybe only at the very end, she was doing the one thing she had never once done in my entire life. She was putting me first. She was, with her last real strength, telling me she was glad I had left her. A dying woman, telling her estranged daughter that she was happy the daughter had chosen herself over the mother. That was the most loving thing my mother ever did, and she did it in the last lucid hour of her life. I held her hand, and I cried, and I told her things too. I won't tell you all of them, because some things are just mine. But I told her I forgave her. And I want to be honest about that word. I didn't say it because the past was erased, or because everything was suddenly okay. I said it because I could see, finally, that she had been a person too. A broken person, raised by broken people, who did not have the tools to love the way I needed, and who was only now, too late, but not never, able to see it. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not saying what you did was okay. Forgiveness is setting down a stone you've been carrying, because you're finally strong enough to set it down, and because carrying it is hurting you more than it's hurting them. I set the stone down in that hospital room. Not for her. For me. And I want to tell you about the hour that followed, because it was the most peaceful hour I ever spent with my mother, and it only happened because it was the last. She drifted, and surfaced, and drifted again. And in the moments she was there, I didn't try to resolve 30 years. There wasn't time, and it wasn't the point. I just held her hand and talked to her the way you talk to someone you love. I told her about my life, about David, about the little house, about the friends, the work, the peace. All the things she'd never asked about, I gave to her freely now, not as a report she was owed, but as a gift I wanted to give. And she listened, really listened. For maybe the first time in my life, my mother listened to me talk about myself without once turning it back to her, because there was nothing left to turn it toward. At the very end, stripped of everything, she was finally just a mother, listening to her daughter. And I realized, sitting there, that I wasn't getting the mother I'd had. I was getting, for 1 hour, the mother I'd always wanted. 6 years too late and 1 hour long, but I was getting her. Some people never get that hour. I know that. I don't take it for granted. My mother slipped out of consciousness a little while after that. She never really came back to full lucidity. And a day and a half later, with my father holding one of her hands and me holding the other, she passed. Quietly, peacefully. And I was there. I was there. If I had listened only to the second voice, the wise, protective, 6 years of therapy voice, I would not have been. I would have been safe at home with my boundary intact, and my mother would have died with her daughter's name on her lips and her daughter absent. And I would have been right to stay home. That's the thing. It would have been a completely justified choice. But I would not have been able to live with it. And that's the difference between being right and being at peace. The will and the years I'd missed. Now, this is a revenge and betrayal channel, and I know some of you have been waiting for the twist. For the moment where it turns out the 61 calls were a manipulation, where the deathbed apology was fake, where the family tried to use the funeral to pull me back into the machine and drain me dry. And I have to be honest with you, that's not what happened. I know that's not the usual story. I know the usual story is that the family shows their true colors and the hero gets their revenge. And I've told stories like that. Sometimes that is what happens. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, something else happens. Something harder to understand. And I'd be lying to you if I dressed this one up as something it wasn't. Here's what I didn't expect. After my mother passed, we found that she had, about a year earlier, quietly made some changes. To her will, to some letters. And in going through her things, my father found a box. The box was mine. My name was on it. In her handwriting. And inside that box were pieces of me. Things I didn't know she'd kept. A drawing I'd made when I was 7. A school report. A photograph of me she'd clearly loved, worn soft at the edges from handling. And letters. Letters she'd written to me, over the 6 years of silence. She'd never sent them. She couldn't. I'd blocked her, and even if she could have, I think her pride wouldn't have let her, right up until the end. But she'd written them, dozens of them, over 6 years, and they were not the letters I would have expected. They were not angry, they were not guilt trips. They started that way, in the early ones. The first few were full of the old fury, the how could you. But as the years went on, the letters changed. You could watch her changing, page by page, year by year. The anger softened into confusion. The confusion softened into grief. And the grief, slowly, softened into understanding. In the later letters, she wasn't asking me to come back. She was working something out on the page. She was, alone, in private, over years, coming to understand exactly what she'd done to me, doing the work I never thought she was capable of, reaching the truth I never thought she'd reach. The last letter, dated just a few weeks before that night, simply said that she understood now, that she was proud of me for leaving, that she hoped I had a beautiful life, and that she would rather I had a beautiful life without her than a broken one with her. I read those letters over 3 nights. I couldn't do them all at once. I'd read a few, and then I'd have to stop, because it was too much, watching my mother, in her own handwriting, slowly become the person I'd needed my whole life, across pages she never thought I'd read. And the most painful part was the dates, because I could line them up against my own life. There was a letter from a week I remembered clearly. A week I'd spent laughing with friends, completely free, not thinking about her at all. And that same week, she'd been sitting alone at a kitchen table, writing to a daughter who'd blocked her, working through her guilt one sentence at a time. We'd been in the same city the whole 6 years, a 40-minute drive apart, and we'd both, separately, in our own silence, been healing from the same wound, me by leaving, her by being left, neither of us knowing the other was doing it too. There's one line I'll never forget. She wrote, "I finally understand I wasn't losing you when you left. I'd already lost you years before, by never seeing you. You leaving was just the first honest thing that ever happened between us." She'd been becoming a better person the whole time. In the silence. Where I couldn't see it. And that is the real gut punch of this whole story. Not a betrayal, the opposite. The discovery that the 6 years I spent believing my family was frozen in their cruelty, my mother was quietly, invisibly, thawing, becoming someone who could finally love me. And I never knew, because the healthiest thing I ever did, the silence, was also the thing that hid it from me. There's no villain in that. There's just 2 people who needed distance to finally see each other, and only got the distance right at the very end. What the silence was really for. So let me tell you where things stand now. Because it's not simple, and I don't want to pretend it is. I did not fall back into the machine. I want to say that clearly, for anyone worried. My mother's death did not magically transform my father and my sister into different people, and it did not transform me back into the shock absorber. What it did was give us all a chance to start something new, on new terms. My terms, actually, for the first time. My father and I have a relationship now, a real, small, careful one. He is a different man since she died, humbled, softened, cracked open by grief, in a way that lets something new grow. He does not lean on me. He does not drain me. When we talk, he asks about my life, and he listens. And I think he's spending the end of his years trying to be, for a little while, the father he never managed to be when it counted. I've let him, not because he's owed it, but because I want to be a person who lets people change when they actually change. My sister and I are working on it, slowly. There's a lot there, but we're trying. She's read the letters too, and I think they changed something in her. Seeing our mother do the work made her want to do it herself. She came to see me a few months after the funeral, alone, which was itself a first. My sister had never once in our whole lives sought me out just to talk. And she sat in my kitchen, and she was nervous, and she said something I did not expect. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it. When you left, I was so angry at you, for years, and I told everyone you'd abandoned us." She took a breath. "But the truth is, I wasn't angry that you left. I was angry that you could, that you were brave enough to, because I wanted to leave too. I just never had the courage. So I stayed, and I got everything you got. All of it. The guilt, the machine, all of it. And I watched you walk free, and I hated you for it, because I couldn't do it myself. And that broke my heart a little, because she'd been drowning too. She'd just chosen the other option, stay and drown quietly, and then resented me for choosing the raft. We're not fully healed, she and I, but that conversation was a start. Two sisters who survived the same house, finally telling each other the truth about it. And me? I kept everything the silence gave me. The peace, the sleep, the friendships, David, the self I found. None of it went away. Because here's the thing I finally understood about those 6 years. The silence was not a punishment I inflicted on my family. The silence was a hospital I checked myself into. I needed those 6 years to heal. And this is the part that took me longest to accept. They needed those 6 years too. My mother could never have written those letters, could never have reached that understanding, if I'd stayed in my seat absorbing shocks. My presence was actually preventing her from changing, because as long as I was there to be blamed, she never had to look at herself. My absence was the mirror. My leaving is what finally made her see. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone, and for yourself, is to leave. Not forever necessarily, but truly, completely. Long enough for both of you to become people who could actually love each other, instead of people trapped in a pattern that never could. I didn't leave to punish them. I left to give us both a chance. And in the end, right at the very end, in a hospital room, with 31 seconds and a paper light hand, that chance finally paid off. It was 6 years too slow, but it came. The best one. So let me tell you what all of this taught me. Because if you've stayed with me to the end, some of this belongs to you now. The first thing I learned is this: leaving is not the same as hating. When I cut off my family, everyone in my life had an opinion, and a lot of those opinions were that I was being cruel, cold, unforgivable. She abandoned her family, but I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because I loved myself enough to stop drowning. And, though I didn't know it at the time, I loved them enough to stop enabling the pattern that kept us all sick. Sometimes distance isn't the end of love. Sometimes distance is the only place love has room to grow. If you've walked away from someone toxic, you are allowed to have done that and still have loved them. Both can be true. They almost always are. The second thing I learned is this: people can change in the silence, where you can't see it, but do not go back until you see the proof. I want to be careful here, because this is the part that could be dangerous if you hear it wrong. My mother changed. She really did. But I did not know that until the very end, and I made my 6 years of decisions based on who she was when I left, not on a hope of who she might become. And that was correct. You cannot stay in a burning building because the person who set the fire might one day learn to stop lighting matches. Protect yourself based on reality, not on hope. If they change, truly change, the proof will show up eventually, the way my mother's letters did. But you wait for the proof. You do not set yourself on fire waiting for it. My mother's growth was real, but it happened on her side of the wall, and the wall is exactly what allowed it. The third thing, and this is the hard one, showing up for someone is not the same as surrendering to them. I went to that hospital, I held my father while he cried, I forgave my dying mother, and I did every bit of it without giving up 1 inch of the boundary that had saved my life, because I finally understood that I could be both. I could be compassionate and protected, present and free, loving and whole. The old me thought it was all or nothing. Either I belonged to them completely, or I cut them off completely. But there was a third way, and it's the way most people never find. You can love someone from behind a boundary. You can grieve someone you left. You can show up for a moment without moving back into the house. The fourth thing I learned is about guilt, and it's for everyone in the silence right now who lies awake wondering if they're a bad person. Guilt is not proof that you did something wrong. It's just proof that you were trained to feel responsible for other people's feelings. For 6 years, I felt guilty, even though I knew I'd made the right choice, even though I was happier and healthier than I'd ever been. The guilt didn't care. It showed up on birthdays and holidays and quiet Sunday afternoons, whispering that a good daughter doesn't leave. But my guilt wasn't information about my behavior. It was a scar from my upbringing. I'd been trained from birth to manage everyone else's emotions, so of course quitting that job felt like a crime. It wasn't a crime, it was a resignation from a job I never should have been given. Do not mistake the discomfort of breaking an unhealthy pattern for the guilt of doing something wrong. They feel identical. They are completely different. Learn to tell them apart, and half your chains fall off. And the last thing, the thing I hold on to most, be the person who picks up the phone, but only after you've become someone who can survive what's on the other end. If I had answered those calls in year one of the silence, it would have destroyed me. I wasn't strong enough yet. The old machinery would have grabbed me and pulled me back under, and I'd have spent the rest of my life as a shock absorber, and my mother would have died never having become the woman who wrote those letters. But I answered in year 6, and by year 6, I was strong enough. I was healed enough. I was whole enough to walk into that hospital as myself, give what I chose to give, and walk out still standing. The silence didn't make me cold. The silence made me strong enough to finally be warm, safely. That's what 6 years of no contact was really for. Not revenge, not punishment. It was the time it took for a broken girl to become a woman solid enough that 61 calls in the night could break her heart, without breaking her. 61 calls pulled me back toward a family I had every right to stay away from. And I went, as a whole person, on my own terms. And I got to hold my mother's hand at the end, and hear her say the words I'd waited my whole life for, and set down a stone I'd carried for 30 years. I could only do that because I left first. The leaving is what made the coming back possible. And if there's someone in your life you've had to walk away from, someone who hurt you, someone you still love in that complicated, aching way, I want you to hear this. Walking away was not the failure. Walking away might be the only thing that ever gives the two of you a real chance. And if the phone ever rings in the night, 61 times, or once, you get to decide who answers it. Not the wounded child you were, the whole person you became. That's the whole story. That's what the silence was for. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care of yourself, and whatever wall you're standing behind right now, I hope you know that building it did not make you a bad person. It might have been the bravest, most loving thing you ever did. For you and for them. Even if they never understand it. Even if you never get the letter, or the voicemail, or the hour at the end. You did not walk away because you stopped loving them. You walked away so that love might finally have somewhere to grow. And if it grows, even quietly, even invisibly, even on the far side of a wall you can't see over, then the silence will have done exactly what it was always meant to do. And if it never grows, then at least you were safe and whole and free while you waited. Either way, you win. Either way, you get your life back. That is what leaving is for. Not revenge, not punishment, just room. Room for you to breathe, and room for them to change, and room for the truth to finally have somewhere to stand. 61 calls, 1 voicemail, 31 seconds, 6 years, and 1 hour, at the very end, that made all of it worth it. Take care of yourself. Truly. And if you're in the silence right now, in the hard middle of it, wondering if you did the right thing, I want you to know healing is happening on both sides of the wall, even when you can't see it, especially when you can't see it. I spent 6 years thinking my silence was a door I'd slammed shut forever. It turned out to be a door that was quietly, on both sides, being sanded down and repaired and made ready, so that when the moment finally came to open it, just once, just for a little while, it could open cleanly, without tearing anyone apart. I don't know how your story ends. Maybe your version has an apology in it, and maybe it never will. Maybe you'll get an hour like mine, and maybe you won't, and I won't pretend that everyone does, because they don't. Some walls stay up forever, and that's the right ending too, sometimes. But whatever your story is, the silence you're keeping is not a sin. It's not a failure of love. Sometimes it's the truest, bravest, most loving thing a person can do, to step back far enough that everyone finally has room to become who they were supposed to be. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to leave. And if the phone ever rings in the night, you, and only you, get to decide who answers it. Make sure it's the whole person you became, not the wounded child you were. That's the whole story. That's what the silence was for.